The wind screamed against the shutters of Rowan's cottage like a banshee demanding entry. He'd lived through plenty of storms in his 3 years on the North Carolina coast, but Hurricane Ophelia was different. The Weather Service had been tracking her 4 days, watching her grow from a tropical depression into a monster that could reshape the coastline. Rowan dabbed his brush in cerulean blue, trying to capture the wild beauty of the storm clouds he'd witnessed that afternoon. His paintings had grown darker since moving here, influenced by the moody Atlantic and his own restless spirit. The city had suffocated him with its endless noise and expectations. Here, with only the ocean and a handful of neighbors scattered along the dunes, he could finally breathe. The cottage groaned under another violent gust. Through the gaps in his shutters, he could see debris flying past his window's palm fronds. Pieces of dock, someone's lawn furniture. The local news had urged everyone to evacuate, but Rowan, like several other stubborn locals, had decided to ride it out. His cottage had survived the hurricane of 1954, according to his elderly landlord. It would survive this one, too. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the earth. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Rowan sat back from his easel and waited for his eyes to adjust to the sudden darkness. The battery-powered radio in his kitchen continued its steady stream of weather updates. The meteorologist's voice tight with concern as he described wind speeds and storm surge predictions. Rowan fumbled for the oil lamp he'd placed on the side table, striking a match and adjusting the wick until warm light filled the small living room. The flame danced wildly, creating shifting shadows on his canvases. Dozens of paintings lined the walls, seascapes, storm clouds. The weathered faces of local fishermen who'd shared their stories over beers at Murphy's Tavern. A sharp knock at his front door made him freeze. Who could possibly be out in this weather? The knock came again, more urgent this time. Rowan grabbed the oil lamp and made his way through the cottage, his bare feet silent on the worn wooden floors. When he opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from his hands. Rain lashed his face, cold and stinging, but he barely noticed because of the woman standing on his covered porch. She was tall and willowy, with auburn hair whipping around her face and intelligent green eyes that seemed to glow in the lamplight. Her clothes were soaked through a simple white cotton dress that clung to her curves, and she was shivering violently. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice nearly lost in the storm's roar. "I'm Celeste. I live in the blue house about a quarter-mile down the beach. A tree came through my roof, and I saw your light." She gestured helplessly at the chaos behind her. "I didn't know where else to go." Rowan stepped back immediately, ushering her inside. "Of course. Come in, please." He closed the door firmly behind her, shutting out the worst of the storm's fury. "Are you hurt?" Celeste shook her head, but he could see she was in shock. Water pooled at her feet as she stood in his entryway, arms wrapped around herself. "It was in my study when I heard this terrible cracking sound. The whole ceiling just ... collapsed. I barely got out in time." "Let me get you something dry," Rowan said, setting the lamp on his kitchen table. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a thick wool sweater and a pair of sweatpants.
Wow.
"These will be too big, but they're warm." "Thank you." Celeste took the clothes gratefully. "I feel so stupid. Should have evacuated like they said on the news." "We're all stupid," Rowan said with a slight smile. "I've been painting this storm all evening instead of boarding up my windows properly." She looked past him at the easel, where his latest canvas showed the angry purple-black clouds that had been building all day. "You're an artist, guilty as charged, and you're..." He realized he knew nothing about his beautiful, bedraggled neighbor except her name, and that she'd just lost her roof. "A marine biologist," Celeste said. "I work for the Coastal Research Station, or worked, I should say. Budget cuts last month." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out studying the effects of climate change on local ecosystems isn't considered essential." "Funding. Their loss," Rowan said, meaning it. "The bathroom's just down the hall if you want to change. I'll put some coffee on the camp stove." As Celeste disappeared down the hallway, Rowan found himself staring after her. In 3 years of living here, he'd kept to himself, politely nodding to neighbors, but never engaging. Something about this woman, though, made him want to know more. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at his painting with genuine interest. or the way she'd spoken about her work with passion despite losing her job. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside his cottage, for the first time in months, Rohan didn't feel quite so alone. Celeste emerged from the bathroom wrapped in Rowan's oversized clothes, the sleeves of his sweater falling past her fingertips. She'd towel-dried her auburn hair, and it now fell in loose waves around her shoulders. The lamplight caught the gold, threads woven through the red, and Rowan found himself staring until she cleared her throat softly. "Much better," she said, settling into the worn leather chair across from his easel. "Thank you for the rescue. Not usually the damsel in distress type." "I wouldn't have pegged you for one," Rowan said, handing her a steaming mug of coffee. He'd managed to brew it on his small camp stove, and the rich aroma filled the cottage. "Marine biologist sounds pretty fearless to me." Celeste wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, inhaling the coffee's scent. "I used to think so too, until everything fell apart." She took a sip and studied him over the rim of her mug. "What about you? What brings a talented artist to the middle of nowhere?" Rowan settled into the chair opposite her, cradling his own coffee. The storm outside seemed to create its own world, separate from reality, where normal social boundaries didn't apply. "Running away, mostly, though I prefer to call it a strategic retreat." "From what?" He was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain pound against his shutters. "My ex-fiancée, my career, the whole suffocating mess of trying to be what everyone else expected me to be." He gestured at his paintings. "I was doing corporate commissions in Manhattan, soulless stuff for hotel lobbies and office buildings. Making good money, living in a nice apartment, engaged to a woman who looked perfect on paper." "But," Celeste prompted gently, "but I was dying inside. Every day felt like wearing a costume that didn't fit." Rowan set down his mug and ran his hands through his dark hair. "The breaking point came at my own gallery opening. 40 paintings of generic cityscapes that meant nothing to me, and everyone was congratulating me on my commercial success. My fiancé was already planning how we'd spend the money, talking about buying a bigger apartment, having the right kind of dinner parties." Celeste nodded slowly. "But you felt like you were disappearing?" "Exactly." Their eyes met across the small space, and Rowan felt something click into place. "How did you know?" "'Cause I've been there." Celeste tucked her legs underneath her in the chair. "I spent 8 years with someone who thought my work was acute. A hobby that I'd grow out of once we got married. Dr. Marcus Webb, if you can believe the pretension. He's a cardiologist in Charleston. Let me guess he wanted you to be the perfect doctor's wife. Bingo, charity luncheons, and country club memberships. He actually told me once that studying fish was unbecoming for a woman of my social position." Celeste's laugh was bitter, as if the ocean cares about social position. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud they both jumped. The oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across their faces. In the momentary brightness of lightning through the shutters, Rowan caught sight of something raw and vulnerable in Celeste's expression. "When did you know it was over?" he asked softly. "The day I got the grant notification for a research project studying coral bleaching in the Caribbean. It was everything I'd worked toward for 3 years, a chance to make a real difference, to contribute something meaningful to climate science." Celeste's voice grew quiet. "I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I ran into Marcus's office at the hospital to tell him, and he congratulated me, then immediately started explaining why I couldn't accept it. It's too dangerous, too far from home, too much time away from planning our wedding." She shook her head. "But the way he looked at me, Rowan, like I was a child who'd gotten carried away playing with toys." "Did you take the grant?" "I did. And he gave me an ultimatum, the researcher him." Celeste met Rowan's eyes. "It's the easiest decision I ever made." Rowan felt a surge of admiration for this woman who'd chosen her passion over security. What happened to the research? Budget cuts killed it 6 months later. Turns out studying dying coral reefs doesn't bring in the kind of funding that pays administrators' salaries. Celeste's voice carried a mixture of sadness and anger. "So, here I am, unemployed and alone in a cottage with a tree through the roof." "Here you are," Rowan agreed, "having coffee with a failed commercial artist during the storm of the century." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the hurricane's fury outside. The intimacy of shared confessions had settled between them like a warm blanket. "Do you ever regret it?" Celeste asked, "walking away from everything?" Rowan looked around his small cottage, at his paintings of storms and seascapes, at this beautiful woman wearing his clothes and sharing her story. Not once. The scariest part wasn't leaving, it was admitting I'd been lying to myself about who I was supposed to be. "I know that feeling." Celeste reached across the small space between their chairs and touched his hand. "It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." Her fingers were warm from the coffee mug, and Rowan felt electricity shoot up his arm at the contact. "Sometimes I think we have to lose everything to find out what we actually want." "What do you want, Rowan?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Outside, the hurricane continued its assault on the coast. But inside the cottage, something entirely different was building. Dawn came slowly, the storm's fury finally beginning to exhaust itself as pale gray light filtered through the gaps in Rowan's shutters. Celeste woke to find herself curled in his leather chair, a quilt tucked carefully around her shoulders. Across the room, Rowan was asleep in his own chair, his dark hair falling across his forehead. They had talked until nearly 3 in the morning, sharing stories and dreams with the honesty that only comes in the dark hours when the world feels like it might be ending. Celeste watched him sleep for a moment, remembering the way his eyes had lit up when she'd asked about his paintings, how his whole face had transformed when he described the first time he'd seen the ocean at sunrise. A loud crack outside made them both startle awake. Through the shutters, they could hear the sound of splintering wood and something heavy hitting the ground. "The storm's moving out," Rowan said, stretching stiffly in his chair. "We should assess the damage." They opened the front door to a world transformed. Rowan's yard was littered with debris, broken tree branches, pieces of siding, and neighbors. Mailbox that had traveled at least a quarter-mile, but it was the view down the beach that made Celeste gasp. Where her blue cottage had stood, there was now mostly open air. The tree that had crashed through her roof had been joined by 2 others, and what remained of her home looked like a child's playhouse that had been stepped on by a giant. "Oh God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's completely destroyed." Rowan's arm came around her shoulders, steady and warm. "I'm so sorry, Celeste, but you're safe. That's what matters." She leaned into his strength, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of her loss. Everything she owned had been in that cottage. Research notes, her books, the few family photos she'd brought from Charleston, her grandmother's jewelry. All of it was either buried under tons of wood and debris or scattered across the dunes by the hurricane's winds. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You start by having breakfast," Rowan said firmly. "Then we make a plan." Back inside the cottage, Rowan busied himself preparing eggs and toast on his camp stove, while Celeste sat at his small kitchen table, staring at her hands. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had no home, no job, and now no possessions beyond the clothes Rowan had given her. "Here," he said, setting a plate in front of her. "Eat something. You'll think more clearly with food in your stomach." "I should call my insurance company," Celeste said, though she made no move toward her phone. "I need to find somewhere to stay while I figure out what to do next." "You're staying here," Rowan said, factly. Celeste looked up at him. In surprise, "I can't impose on you like that. You barely know me." "I know enough." Rowan sat down across from her with his own plate. "I know you're brilliant and passionate and brave enough to choose your dreams over security. I know you make me laugh, and that talking to you last night was the first time in months I felt truly awake." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know I don't want you to leave." The simple honesty of his words made Celeste's throat tighten with emotion. After Marcus, who had made her feel like her needs were always secondary, here was a man who seemed to see her clearly and want exactly who she was. "Rowan, I know decisions right now," he said gently. "Just stay for a few days while you get your bearings. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Over the next several hours, they worked together to survey the damage to both properties. Rowan's cottage had fared much better, a few missing shingles, a broken window, and a fence that would need rebuilding. But as they picked through the Wreckage of Celeste's home. Salvaging what little they could find intact, Rowan watched her face grow more and more determined. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said, pulling her waterlogged laptop from beneath a fallen beam. "I feel relieved. Relieved. The cottage never really felt like home. It was just a place I was hiding out, licking my wounds and feeling sorry for myself." Celeste straightened up, pushing her hair back from her face. "Maybe this is the universe's way of telling me it's time to stop hiding." That evening, as they sat on Rowan's front porch watching the sunset paint the storm-washed sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Celeste found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the paint stains on his fingers that spoke of a life dedicated to creating beauty. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her staring. "I'm thinking that yesterday I had a home, a plan, a very clear idea of what my life was going to look like," she said slowly. "Today I have none of those things, and somehow I feel more hopeful than I have in months." "Sometimes destruction clears the way for something better to grow," Rowan said. "Is that what happened to you when you left New York?" "Eventually. It took a while to stop feeling like I was just running away from something and start feeling like I was running toward something." "And what were you running toward?" Rowan turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I think I'm just figuring that out." 3 weeks after Hurricane Ophelia, Rowan's cottage had become a comfortable nest for two. Celeste had claimed the small sunroom as her temporary office, spreading her salvaged research papers across every available surface as she worked to recreate years of climate data from memory and backup files stored in the cloud. The coral samples from 2019 showed a 30% increase in bleaching, she muttered, typing furiously on the replacement laptop Rowan had insisted on buying for her. "But the water temperature data doesn't match what I recorded in my field notes." Rowan looked up from his easel, where he was working on a new series of paintings inspired by the hurricane. This one showed the aftermath debris transformed into abstract sculptures by the storm's fury, with new green shoots already pushing up through the sand. "Maybe the field notes were wrong," he suggested gently. This was the third day she'd been struggling with the same discrepancy. "My field notes are never wrong," Celeste said, with the confidence of a scientist who had spent years perfecting her methodology. "I think the temperature sensors at the monitoring station were malfunctioning." "So what does that mean for your research?" Celeste sat back in her chair, pushing her hair out of her face. "It means I need to go back out there and collect new samples, but without funding or institutional support." "You could apply for independent research grants," Rowan suggested. "Start your own consulting firm." "With what credentials?" "I'm an unemployed marine biologist living in someone else's cottage." "You're Dr. Celeste Morgan, who has published 12 peer-reviewed papers on climate change impacts in coastal ecosystems," Rowan said firmly. "Your work doesn't become less valuable because some administrator decided to cut your funding." Celeste smiled at him, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest that had been growing stronger each day. Rowan had a way of seeing her potential when she couldn't see it herself. "When did you become such an expert on marine biology careers?" "Since I started falling for a marine biologist?" The words hung in the air between them, unplanned but honest. They had been dancing around their growing feelings for weeks, sharing meals and conversations and the easy intimacy of people learning to live together, but neither had voiced what was becoming increasingly obvious. "Rowan," Celeste said softly. "I know we agreed to take things slow," he said, setting down his brush and turning to face her fully. "I know you're dealing with a lot right now. I can't pretend anymore that you're just a house guest who's staying until she gets back on her feet." Celeste stood up from her desk and walked to where he sat. "What am I then? You're the person who makes me want to paint the sunrise instead of just the storms. You're the reason I actually look forward to getting up in the morning." Rowan reached for her hands. "You're the woman I'm completely, terrifyingly in love with." Instead of the fear she might have expected, Celeste felt a rush of joy so pure it took her breath away. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling like coming home. "I think I have since that first night when you let me cry about my collapsed ceiling and didn't try to fix everything for me. I wanted to fix everything for you." "I know. But you didn't. You just listened and made me feel like my feelings mattered." Celeste cupped his face in her hands. Do you know how rare that is? Instead of answering with words, Rowan pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. So what do we do now? Celeste asked. I mean, practically speaking, I can't live in your sunroom forever. Why not? Because... Celeste paused, realizing she didn't actually have a good answer. Because that's not how things work. Says who? Rowan stood up and pulled her toward the kitchen where the morning light was streaming through the windows. Look at this place, Celeste. Really look at it. She followed his gaze around the cottage that had become so familiar. The kitchen, where they cooked together every evening, arguing playfully about whether garlic belonged in everything. The living room, where her books had gradually mingled with his on the shelves. The front porch, where they watched storms roll in from the ocean and planned impossible dreams. It feels like ours, she admitted, because it is ours. We've been building something together without even realizing it. Rowan gestured toward her sunroom office. Your research belongs here. My paintings belong here. We belong here. Who are you? Asking me to move in with you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. Here, where we can both be exactly who we're meant to be. Celeste looked out the window toward the spot where her old cottage had stood. The debris had been cleared away weeks ago, leaving nothing but a flat patch of sand and the concrete foundation. For weeks, she'd been thinking of it as a scar on the landscape, a reminder of what she'd lost. But now, suddenly, she saw it differently. It wasn't a scar, it was a blank canvas. What if we rebuilt there? She said slowly, the idea taking shape as she spoke. Not just a house, but a proper research station. A place where I could collect samples and analyze data, maybe even host other researchers. Rowan's eyes lit up. The studio space for me to paint, a lab where I could process water samples, a workshop where I could build equipment. For your research? They stared at each other, both recognizing the moment when a wild dream suddenly became a real possibility. It would take months to plan and build, Celeste said. Years, probably. It would be expensive. We'd have to do most of the work ourselves. Are we really talking about this? Celeste asked. I think we are. Rowan pulled her close again. I think we're talking about building our forever. 6 months later, Celeste stood in the doorway of their almost completed research station. Watching Rowan install the last of the solar panels on the roof, the building was a beautiful blend of form and function. Her practical requirements for laboratory space and equipment storage merged seamlessly with his artist's eye for natural light and coastal design. That's the last one? No, Rowan called down to her, wiping sweat from his forehead. Dr. Morgan's coastal research station is officially off the grid. Celeste grinned up at him. Still can't believe we actually did this. Believe it. We've got running water, solar power, a state-of-the-art lab, and the best studio space I've ever worked in. Rowan climbed down the ladder and pulled her into his arms, both of them dusty and exhausted, but glowing with accomplishment. Plus the coffee maker is finally hooked up. Thank God for priorities. Celeste laughed. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of permit applications, construction, and learning to work together in ways they'd never imagined. Celeste had discovered she was surprisingly handy with power, tools, while Rowan had revealed an unexpected talent for research station design. They'd fought over everything from window placement to lab bench height, but each argument had only made their final product stronger. More importantly, Celeste's independent research was already gaining attention in the scientific community. Her preliminary findings on post-hurricane ecosystem recovery had attracted funding from 2 major environmental foundations, and she was expecting her first visiting researcher next month. I got an email from Dr. Patricia Voss at Woods Hole, Celeste said, pulling out her phone. Wants to collaborate on a study comparing hurricane impacts on coral reefs versus seagrass beds. That's amazing, Rowan said, meaning it. He'd learned enough about marine biology over the past months to understand what a big deal collaboration with Woods Hole represented. When does she want to start? Next spring? She's got funding for a 3-year study. Celeste looked up at him with shining eyes. Rowan, this could establish our station as a major research hub. Our station, he repeated, loving the sound of it. I like that. Speaking of which, Celeste said, suddenly looking nervous, I have something for you. She disappeared into the lab and returned carrying a small wrapped package. I know we don't officially have a station opening ceremony, but I thought. Rowan unwrapped the gift to find a bronze plaque that read, "The Tempest Point Research Station, founded by Dr. Celeste Morgan and Rowan Hayes, 2024, where art meets science." Tempest Point? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. It's what the old-timers call this stretch of beach. Seemed appropriate, considering how we met. Celeste took his hands. Plus, I wanted both our names on it. This place is as much yours as it is mine. Rowan set the plaque carefully on a lab bench and pulled her close. I have something for you, too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Celeste's breath caught in her throat. Before you panic, he said quickly, I'm not proposing. Not yet, anyway. This is something else. Inside the box was a ring, but not an engagement ring. Instead, it was a simple band of silver set with a piece of sea glass, the same deep green as her eyes. I found the glass on the beach the morning after Ophelia, Rowan explained. It was sitting right where your old cottage used to be, like the storm had left it there specifically for us to find. Celeste held out her hand, tears blurring her vision as he slipped the ring onto her right ring finger. It's a promise, he said, that no matter what storms come, we'll weather them together. That we'll keep building something beautiful out of whatever life throws at us. I love it, Celeste whispered. I love you. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They stood in the doorway of their research station, watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The same ocean that had brought destruction to their lives had also brought them together. The same storm that had taken away Celeste's old life had cleared the ground for this new one. Do you think we would have found each other if it hadn't been for Ophelia? Celeste asked. Rowan considered the question seriously. Maybe, but I don't think we would have been ready for each other. We both needed to lose everything to understand what we actually wanted. And what do you want now? This, Rowan said simply, gesturing at their station, at the life they'd built together. You, me, and whatever adventures come next. As if in response to his words, a pod of dolphins surfaced just beyond the breakers. Their sleek bodies cutting through the waves in perfect synchronization. Celeste laughed with delight, already reaching for her camera to document their behavior patterns. There's your first official research subject at the new station, Rowan said. Actually, Celeste said, still watching the dolphins, I think they're welcoming us home. As the last light of day painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, Rowan had to agree. After years of feeling lost, of not knowing where he belonged, he'd finally found his place. It's not just a location on a map, but a life built with someone who understood that the most beautiful things often grow in the spaces left behind by storms.